Dallas, Texas. The scorching summer heat burned through the air, with temperatures hitting 100 degrees Fahrenheit. In the parking lot of Titan Auto, the engines of luxury sports cars roared with pride, their polished surfaces reflecting the blinding sun. Marcus Evans pulled his old Ford F-150 into the lot, slowly searching for a spot. His pickup truck wasn't flashy, didn't have a vanity plate, just an ordinary vehicle in a world of Cadillac Escalades, BMW X7s and Mercedes-Benz G-Wagons. When he stepped out, he wore a faded t-shirt, worn-out jeans and a pair of old sneakers. No one even glanced his way. He looked around, observing how the staff interacted with customers. A man in a tailored suit had just stepped out of a Porsche 911, and within seconds, 3 salesmen rushed over, all smiles and eager handshakes. And Marcus? Not a single acknowledgement. He walked into the showroom, his sharp eyes scanning every face. They had no idea who he was. And that was exactly what he wanted. He wasn't here for the cars, he was here to test the people. Inside Titan Auto, the air was thick with the scent of leather and fresh wax. The hum of business deals and the faint clicking of dress shoes against the polished marble floor filled the space. Marcus Evans took his time, moving past rows of gleaming vehicles, his fingers grazing the cool metal of a Dodge Charger Hellcat. He wasn't here for the cars, though. He was here to see if the people inside this showroom played by the same rules for everyone, or if they only rolled out the red carpet for those who looked like money. He approached a Mustang Shelby GT500, pausing to admire the craftsmanship. Still no one had acknowledged him. At the front desk, a young receptionist scrolled through her phone, barely looking up. Salesmen, dressed in tailored suits and Rolex watches, clustered around customers who fit the part. Men in pressed button-downs, women with designer handbags. Finally, Marcus made his way to a nearby salesman, a man in his late 30s with slicked-back hair and a confident grin. The salesman barely concealed his disinterest. "Need help?" he asked, voice flat, eyes flicking over Marcus's worn-out jeans and faded t-shirt. "Thinking about taking that GT500 for a spin?" Marcus replied, nodding toward the car. The salesman scoffed. "That one might be a little out of your range, buddy. But we do have some nice pre-owned models in the back. Might be more in your budget?" Marcus felt the heat rise in his chest, that familiar burn of indignation. He kept his face neutral, but inside, his blood boiled. He'd seen this kind of treatment before. Hell, he'd lived it. Judged not by what you said or what you could afford, but by how you looked. "You sure about that?" Marcus asked, tilting his head. The salesman shrugged. "Just being honest with you. These cars? They're not exactly cheap." Marcus exhaled slowly, forcing a smile. "Well, I guess it's a good thing I came prepared." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cashier's check, one that could buy the car outright. The salesman's smirk faltered. His eyes widened as he took in the numbers, realizing his mistake too late. Marcus didn't need the car. He needed the truth. And now he had it. The silence that followed was thick with tension. The salesman's face paled as his eyes darted between Marcus and the cashier's check, his arrogant smirk now replaced with nervous hesitation. The once dismissive energy had vanished, replaced by a desperate scramble to correct his mistake. "Sir, I didn't mean to imply," the salesman stammered, forcing an apologetic smile. "Of course we can set up a test drive right now. Let me just grab the keys." Marcus didn't move. He held the salesman's gaze, his expression unreadable. The anger still simmered inside him, not just because of the insult but because he knew this wasn't just about him. How many others had walked into this dealership, only to be judged and turned away before they had a chance? How many had left, humiliated, without ever realizing they were being pushed aside because of an assumption? "Don't bother," Marcus said, tucking the check back into his pocket. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. The manager, a stocky man in a navy suit, rushed over, sensing the shift in atmosphere. His voice was drenched in fake warmth. "Sir, is there a problem? We'd love to make this right." Marcus let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Right? You mean after I pulled out the check? What if I didn't? Would you still be ignoring me?" The manager's smile faltered, but Marcus wasn't finished. He turned, addressing the entire showroom, his voice carrying through the air like a challenge. "How many times does this happen? How many people get treated like they don't belong the second they walk through that door?" A hush fell over the dealership. Some customers shifted uncomfortably. A few salesmen exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly aware that they were being watched. The salesman who had brushed Marcus off earlier swallowed hard. "Look man, Save it," Marcus cut in. His eyes flicked to the car, sleek, powerful, everything he had wanted since he was a kid. But now, it wasn't worth it. If he had to fight for respect just to buy it, then this place didn't deserve his business. Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving behind more than just the car. He left behind a lesson. And whether they learned from it or not, that was on them. As Marcus stepped out of the dealership, the cold evening air hit his face, but it did nothing to cool the fire burning in his chest. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, not out of weakness but out of sheer frustration. This wasn't just about a car. It was about dignity. About the way people like him were constantly forced to prove their worth in spaces that should have welcomed them without question. He had worked too hard, climbed too many mountains, and shattered too many barriers to let some small-minded salesman dictate his place in the world. But the worst part? This wasn't a rare incident. It happened every day in places big and small, in ways both blatant and subtle. A voice called after him. "Hey Marcus, wait." He turned to see a young woman hurrying out of the dealership. Alicia, one of the newer sales associates. She was out of breath, her expression laced with both frustration and something else, determination. "I saw what happened in there," she said, glancing back at the glass doors where the manager and the salesman were watching, their faces stiff with forced indifference. "It was wrong. And it's not the first time. That's why I'm quitting." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" She nodded. "Yeah. I don't want to work somewhere that treats people like this. And I know others feel the same way." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. Maybe the lesson he had left behind inside wasn't entirely lost. As he walked to his car, he could feel the weight of the moment settling in. Change didn't happen overnight. But it started somewhere, with moments like this, with people willing to stand up, to push back, to demand better. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. "Hey Jonathan," he said when his friend picked up. "You still looking for a new sales rep? I think I've got someone for you." Alicia's eyes widened in surprise, then gratitude. Marcus smirked. If the dealership wanted to keep running on outdated biases, that was their problem. But the world was moving forward, with or without them. And he was done asking for a seat at the table. From now on he'd be building his own. As Marcus sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, he took a deep breath. The sting of what had just happened was still fresh, but beneath the frustration there was something else: resolve. This wasn't the first time he had faced this kind of treatment, but damn if he was going to let it slide. Not this time. Not ever again. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from Alicia. "I meant what I said. We deserve better. Let me know how I can help." Marcus exhaled, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. That's how it started. One person standing up. Then another. And another. He tapped out a response. "You just did." As he pulled out of the dealership lot, an idea began forming in his mind. He had spent years proving himself in boardrooms, negotiating high-stakes deals, ensuring that people like him had a fair shot in places that weren't built with them in mind. But what about the ones still fighting to get through the door? The ones being turned away before they even had a chance to prove themselves? By the time he reached his office, he knew exactly what needed to be done. He spent the next few days reaching out to business owners, community leaders, even former colleagues who had walked away from toxic workplaces for the same reasons he nearly had tonight. If the system refused to change, they would build their own. Then the real push began. He drafted a statement, calling out discriminatory practices in the auto industry, urging transparency in hiring and sales. It wasn't long before his words caught fire. Local news stations reached out. Advocacy groups backed him. And when the dealership's management tried to dismiss him as just another angry customer, they quickly realized their mistake. Marcus Porter wasn't just another customer. He was a movement. Days later, Alicia sent him a picture, a going out of business sign hanging in the dealership's window. "Told you," she wrote. Marcus chuckled. They had built walls to keep people like him out, never realizing that one day, those same walls would crumble under their own weight. The fallout was swift and brutal. The dealership's closure sent ripples through the industry, forcing others to rethink their practices. But for Marcus, this was never about bringing down one business. It was about something much bigger. It was about making sure no one else had to swallow the same humiliation he had. As the weeks passed, his fight gained momentum. More stories poured in, emails, phone calls, even people stopping him on the street. A young mechanic who had been denied a promotion for years despite his skills. A single mother who was quoted a higher price on a car simply because the dealer assumed she didn't know better. The injustices weren't isolated. They were woven into the very fabric of the system. That realization fueled him. With the help of Alicia and a growing network of advocates, Marcus launched the Fair Deal Initiative, a coalition dedicated to exposing discriminatory practices in sales and hiring. They didn't just call out businesses. They provided legal resources, helped people understand their rights, and pushed for real, enforceable policy changes. And people listened. Local representatives reached out, eager to discuss legislation. News outlets ran in-depth reports. Even major corporations, ones that had long ignored these issues, began issuing statements, pledging to review their policies. But as expected, not everyone welcomed the change. One evening, as Marcus locked up his office, his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. "You think you can change how business works?" The voice was smooth, controlled, but there was a sharp edge underneath. "You don't know who you're messing with?" Marcus clenched his jaw. He had expected pushback. He had expected threats. But fear wasn't an option. He took a slow breath before answering. "You're right. I don't know who you are," he said. "But you sure as hell know who I am." A beat of silence. Then the line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone for a moment before tucking it into his pocket. He knew this fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But that was the thing about walls. Push hard enough and eventually they fall. Marcus knew the threats wouldn't stop. The more he pushed, the harder the resistance would hit. But he refused to back down. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had been cheated, dismissed, or silenced. One night, as he was leaving the office, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The same one he'd seen twice before. Coincidence? Not likely. His instincts told him he was being watched. Maybe even followed. But intimidation wasn't going to make him stop. Instead, it fueled his determination. The next morning, he held a press conference, exposing the threats he had received. "If they think fear will silence me, they haven't been paying attention," he said, voice steady, eyes burning with conviction. "We will not back down. Not now. Not ever." The response was overwhelming. Support flooded in from across the country. Business owners pledging transparency, lawyers offering pro bono help, even former employees of shady dealerships stepping forward with insider information. The fight was no longer his alone. But with the support came more danger. Late one evening, as Marcus walked toward his car, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Too fast. Too intentional. He turned just in time to see a masked figure lunging at him. This was no longer just about business. This was war. The story of Marcus is a powerful reminder that standing up for justice comes at a cost, but silence costs even more. When corruption thrives unchecked, everyday people suffer. Marcus's journey teaches us that fear is the greatest weapon of those who seek to maintain power, and the only way to fight back is through resilience, unity, and truth. In real life, we may not face masked attackers, but we do encounter injustice, whether in the workplace, in our communities, or even online. The lesson here is clear. Speak up even when it's uncomfortable. Seek allies because no fight for justice is won alone. And most importantly, never let intimidation dictate your actions. Courage is not the absence of fear but the refusal to let it control you. Change begins with those willing to risk everything for what's right.